Before we begin, we would like to extend our deepest sympathies to the families of the victims of these senseless crimes. The loss of their loved ones in such a tragic manner is heartbreaking, and their memories will forever be honored and cherished.
A family is a place of safety and unconditional love, where disputes and disagreements are bound to happen. But sometimes, these don't remain as passing arguments. They become signs of deeper problems that go unnoticed. Resentment builds up, trust gets eroded, and the very foundation of such relationships begins to crack. How do these once close relationships unravel to such an irretrievable point? What can prevent these tragic outcomes before it's too late? Today, we are going to see stories of how unresolved family disputes can escalate into crimes that shock communities and leave families shattered. First, in the quiet town of Westminster, Maryland, a family's darkest secrets come to light with a crime so brutal it shocked the entire community. How could a son turn on his father in such a horrifying way, leaving a legacy of fear and betrayal? Second, in the bustling city of Hong Kong, a shocking discovery reveals the dark side of a mother's mind. What could drive a parent to commit an unthinkable act against their own child? Lastly, in a quiet English town, Bournemouth, UK, a son's mounting debt and hidden resentment culminated in a brutal crime. How did a family dispute spiral into a horrifying act of patricide that left a community reeling? Let's find out. Westminster, set in the heart of Carroll County, is one of those towns where neighbors wave at each other, making life as peaceful as the rolling hills surrounding it. It's a town in which everybody seems to know everyone, and most of life's biggest crises revolve around Friday night football games at the local high school or the periodic town meeting. It was an October evening in 2022, crisply cool and rare in the quiet town of Westminster, Maryland. Aside from the humming sound of a passing car or the rustling leaves as autumn set in, there was no disturbance in this peaceful place. Medford Road seemed serene, cutting through the countryside outside New Windsor, a place where one could walk and feel completely alone with their thoughts. But on that fateful evening, the silence was shattered by a gruesome discovery. A young man who had gone for a walk out to clear his mind and noticed something peculiar lying in the roadway, bound with what looked like linens and a rug. He approached the bundle as his heart was pounding in his chest. What he had found was something of nightmares, a dismembered body that had been tightly wrapped in an almost desperate manner to hastily conceal it. He stumbled backwards, his throat heavy, as he fumbled for his phone to call the police. The authorities arrived quickly, their flashing lights cutting through the growing darkness. They approached the body with grim determination, knowing from the start that this was no accident. The body was later identified as that of Dr. Magambe Pansuria, a respected local physician. He had been reported missing earlier that evening by his wife, who was already frantic with worry. Dr. Pansuria's wife had told the police that her husband hadn't returned home after a day out, something completely out of character for him. The police began their investigation, combing through the Pansuria residence for any clues. As they did so, the details of this horrific crime began to unfold, piece by piece. One of the clues came from the wife herself. She mentioned that a runner-style rug had vanished from their laundry room. It was an odd detail, but in the context of a missing persons case, it seemed significant. The sheets and the mat found along with Dr. Pansuria's body were perfectly wrapped, fixing them together with duct tape. The police later connected the missing rug to the one found wrapped around the body, which was then a confirmation that Dr. Pansuria's final moments had been played out within the confines of his own home. While the investigators searched the locality, they saw a very familiar vehicle entering the house. It was a truck, and interestingly, it was of the Pensuria family. Inside was Ravi Magambe Pensuria, the 31-year-old son of Dr. Pensuria, who showed no change in the expression on his face while parking his truck in front of the building. It was as if nothing really had happened. As they drew closer, they could see he was not alone. There was a hedge trimmer, branch cutters, an axe, a pickaxe, a baseball hat, and a rake in the truck. All were smeared with a mixture of dirt, debris, and blood. The tools seemed as if they were gathered in a hurry, as though someone attempting to clean up a mess but didn't have the time or thought to do it properly. But what was shocking and groundbreaking was a piece of evidence that would change the trajectory of this case. Ravi's fingerprints were found on the adhesive side of the duct tape used to wrap the sheets and the mat found along with Dr. Pensuria's body, a detail that would be the final nail in his coffin. On Ravi's close examination, the investigators detected other things. Ravi's pants had a stain of blood. The forensic team was quick in sending it for examination. The outcome was clear as daylight. The blood on Ravi's pants matched Dr. Pensuria's. Ravi was running out of time, as the authorities were not merely guessing that he was the suspect, but instead digging concrete evidence to pin him down. And in the process, the police found out more about Ravi's activities on the day his father died. They realized that Ravi was at a local store earlier that morning. Their surveillance cameras captured him buying the tape, the instruments, and other items which were quite unusual. The evidence indicated that Ravi had not committed the crime on the spur of the moment. Rather, he had carefully planned the tools he would use and the attempt to dispose of his father's body. Dr. Stephanie Dean, the chief medical examiner of the state of Maryland, was called to perform the autopsy. What she found was astounding to even the most seasoned professionals. Dr. Pensuria had been stabbed a total of 45 times. It was clear that rage fueled the attack. Besides the stab wounds, he had sustained 9 cutting wounds and blunt force injuries to the head. It was more than just a murder, as it was an act of pure hatred. But the horror did not stop at this. The body was dismembered so badly that pieces of Dr. Pensuria's body were recovered over a period of 3 days in different places. It was as if Ravi had tried to erase his father from existence to make him cease to exist entirely. However, in the process, he left a trail of evidence against himself that was too damning to ignore. As the investigation continued, one of the central focuses was Ravi's motive. Why would a son brutally kill his own father? The reasons were complex and deeply intertwined with the dynamics of the Pensuria family. Ravi had always been a troubled soul as he struggled with mental health issues and had strained relations with his father. Dr. Pensuria, on the other hand, was a man of great success and respect, and he had high hopes for his son. This had been building up for some time, festering, and ready to explode. Ravi's resentment towards his father had become darker, and he could no longer keep it inside himself. The pressure of living up to his father's expectations, coupled with his emotional turmoil, became an explosive mixture of feelings. As the trial approached, the community of Westminster could only stand in utter disbelief. How could this happen to him within their town, one that had so much to offer? The courtroom was full as the details unfolded, each new piece of evidence painting a man who lost all reality. Ravi's defense team tried to claim that he was of an unsound mind at the time of the murder, and that it was a result of untreated mental illness. That was not the act of a person in a temporary mental lapse, but rather a well-planned action. After a few hours, the jury came to a decision after deliberations. Ravi Magambe Pensura was convicted of murdering his father and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Relief and sorrow came with the sentence. Justice had prevailed, but at a tremendous cost. A father was dead, a son was lost, and a family was broken beyond repair. After the trial ended, the town of Westminster tried to piece their lives back together and move on. The circle would never be complete for the Pensuria family. For years to come, the why and how questions would keep pounding in their minds. They were left to pick up the pieces of a life shattered by violence, to mourn the loss of a man who had been taken from them in the most brutal way imaginable. The murder of Dr. Magambe Pensuria will be remembered not for the mere horror of the act, but for the deep gashes across a community and family. This is a story of betrayal by one's son, a life cut short, and of how darkness can creep in through some of the most unimaginable ways. Now imagine this: a mother and daughter living quietly in a crowded Hong Kong neighborhood. Their lives were seemingly ordinary. But behind those walls, a nightmare was unfolding, one that would leave the community shattered and searching for answers. Let's get into the story. In the bustling district of Mong Kok, Hong Kong, streets with vendors, neon lights, and the scent of street food behind the closed doors of a modest subdivided flat came forth a tragedy of unimaginable horror. Xiao Yan is a 40-year-old woman whose name would soon be associated with one of the most chilling cases. Xiao Yan was not the type that would make you raise an eyebrow in a crowd. To the neighbors, she was just another resident, quietly living with her 12-year-old daughter, Zhu Xinlei. Their little, cramped flat, typical of a subdivided housing in Bangkok, was their sanctuary, a place they shared with everyday routine, laughter, and occasional disputes. But beneath a storm brewed, in Xiao Yan's mind to its tragic and terrifying conclusion. Xiao Yan's life was never easy. A native of mainland China, she moved to Hong Kong in search of a better life. Her life in the city was not exactly the dream she had envisioned. Battling the challenges of rearing a child in alien soil and financial trouble, she found herself slipping deeper into a sea of despair. The pressures of life, feeling isolated, and failures overwhelmed her sanity. As time went by, close observers of Xiao Yan could sense that she was not the same person anymore. The once loving and considerate mother became more reclusive and aggressive. Friends and neighbors had seen that she seemed to be talking to herself, mumbling unclearly about voices in her head. However, in a city as fast-paced and crowded as Hong Kong, where everybody is engrossed in one's own struggles, these signs largely went unnoticed. The gloomy clouds in her mind announced these facts that all was well with her daughter Xinlei, a bright, chirpy girl, darling of her mother, in love with her school, popular with friends, and dreaming of becoming a teacher one day. Xiao Yan grew increasingly paranoid and began to control all. Suddenly, she began thinking her daughter was plotting against her, that the beautiful little girl had grown to become a menace. On December 17, 2017, it started as a normal day for the district of Mong Kok. All the streets were bustling as usual, with people moving around in a hurry and businesses operating at full speed. In the small flat, however, the atmosphere was far from normal. The tension between Xiao Yan and her daughter had reached a boiling point. That night, Xiao Yan did the unthinkable in a crazed fit. Armed with a meat cleaver, she attacked her daughter. In a frenzied state, Xiao Yan dismembered her daughter's body, her actions driven by the delusions that had consumed her mind. The flat, once a home filled with the warmth of a mother and daughter, became a scene of unimaginable horror. The body of little Xinlei was left inside the flat for a day and a half, scattered and hidden in different corners of the small area. Meanwhile, Xiao Yan went about her business as usual. In her broken state of mind, perhaps feeling that the gravity of her act was too monstrous for her to grasp. It was only when the neighbors complained that police came to the door. The police who entered the apartment saw a real-life scene from their worst nightmares. The police were shocked into disbelief at the discovery of the young 12-year-old girl's remains spread all over the apartment. Xiaoyan was arrested on the spot, cool and detached, like she was just an observer of the crime. She was sent to the police station where detailed investigation into the night's happenings began. It was all in the headlines. The trial of Xiaoyan. People wanted to know how a mother could do such an unspeakable thing. The courtroom was crowded with journalists, spectators, and experts who were trying to find any sense in the tragedy. But the more details came out, it was very clear this wouldn't be just any case of cold-blooded murder. Xiaoyan's defense hinged upon her mental state during the process. Psychiatrists testified in court that she was suffering from a severe mental disorder like schizophrenia, which had plagued her with delusions and hallucinations for a long time. According to court reports, Xiaoyan later claimed she was hearing voices that told her she needed to save her daughter from some imagined threat. In this state of delusion, she genuinely believed that the only protection for Jinlei was to take her life away. That was twisted logic born from a mind that had lost its grip on reality. Those delusions later motivated her to commit the crime, considering that she was saving her daughter from a fate worse than death. The prosecution, on the other hand, while not denying she had mental problems, claimed the crime was pre-planned because Xiaoyan had tried to hide the body. In contrast, the defense argued such acts did not mean planning, but the result of disordered thinking. Ultimately, Xiaoyan was convicted not of murder, but of manslaughter, due in part to the grounds of diminished capacity because of her mental illness. The judge deemed the severity of her condition, along with the danger she presented to herself and others, and ordered that Xiaoyan be detained in a psychiatric hospital indefinitely. The Xiaoyan case probably left another very deep scar in the community, a haunting reminder of how delicate the line actually was between sanity and madness. To residents of Mongkok, the tragedy served as a reminder of the realities of mental illness and a final call to seek the necessary help before it is too late. Even beyond the walls of the family household, Jinli's death was a loss that vibrated deeply. Her schoolmates and teachers remembered her as a brilliant but loving child, and the community at large grieved in which a young life could be taken in such a brutal and senseless manner. As for Xiaoyan, her fate was sealed, as she would be confined to a psychiatric institution and spend her days under supervision. The once hopeful immigrant who had arrived in Hong Kong in pursuit of a better life was now in prison within a cage of her own making of the illness that drove her to commit the unthinkable. The sad story of Xiaoyan and her daughter is one that will stick in the minds of those who hear a grim reminder of the darkness that can reside inside the human mind. We reflect on this case on the importance of compassion, understanding, and mental health care. And lastly, a son living with his father in a quiet seaside town harbors a dark secret. One night, that secret erupts into a gruesome act of betrayal that shocks the entire community. Let's see what happens here. In the seaside town of Bournemouth, Dorset, often associated with all things nice and lovely, life takes on darker hues. A chilling story unfolded in this lovely town in May 2013. Nathan Robinson and his father, William Spiller, lived at a modest flat beside Bournemouth. They lived just like a normal father and son in any flat, at least in the public eye. William was a 48-year-old taxi driver and was what one would call a hard-working man, supporting a family. However, his relations with Nathan had never been good. Nathan's life had not been a smooth one. Many troubles had followed him ever since he was a kid, including mental health issues and episodes of drug abuse. His conduct with his father was often full of bitterness, and things only got worse. By 2013, Nathan was already deep in debt as he owed his father an incomprehensible sum of money, £36,000, which William had lent him in hopes of helping his son somehow put his life on track. However, Nathan's path only moved towards worse. This enormous debt became a reason for growing tensions between them. The evening of May 16th seemed to pass like any other. The flat was quiet, except for the amount of noise that the television in the sitting room could provide. There had been an argument between Nathan and William earlier in the day. The shouting between them had risen over how much money Nathan owed. The neighbor downstairs at around 8 p.m. heard some commotion this time. There were scuffles, and it sounded like William was loudly shouting his son to get him an ambulance. What really happened afterward is a story of unspeakable horror. Nathan's then stabbed his father with a Stanley knife, a hacksaw, and a saw. He mutilated the body in a gruesome manner, an act that required both time and a chilling sense of detachment to carry out. Dismembering the remains carefully, Nathan put the body parts in plastic storage boxes. These boxes were then kept as a TV stand in his father's bedroom, and therefore held the grim remains of William Spiller, his father. His head was in a separate box and put in a filing cabinet. He started the work of hiding his father's remains immediately and went about eliminating all the evidence. He stole William's mobile phone and thousands of pounds in cash money that would soon fund a bizarre and callous escapade across the UK. Over the next few weeks, Nathan traveled to Glasgow, Birmingham, and Bristol, visiting friends and relatives as if nothing had happened. He used the money to go out partying with friends, and even took his mother on a vegan weekend getaway, while his dad's remain decomposed in the apartment they shared. Nathan's behavior during the period was nothing short of disturbing. He acted carefree and indulged in activities completely opposite of what one would expect from someone who knew he had committed such a crime. But his actions were not those of a man at peace with himself. On the other hand, in the flat, the body of William Spiller had laid undiscovered for a month. The neighbors who lived in this building, some of whom had previously heard the sounds of struggle, were oblivious to the horror that lay just above their heads. It was only when William's ex-partner, Miss Molyneux, became anxious about his living conditions that the police were finally informed. She had called William several times, but since she wasn't able to get through, she called the police to ask them to go in and do a welfare check. Exactly 1 month later, on June 16, 2013, Dorset police came to the flat. What they found there was the stuff of which nightmares are made. The smell of decomposition led them to the storage boxes, where they found the dismembered remains of William Spiller. It was a gruesome find, even for veteran officers who had served for decades. Nathan Robinson was immediately arrested. It was a really sensationalized trial of Nathan Robinson at Winchester Crown Court, and everybody was interested in knowing what had occurred in that horrific crime. The courtroom was full to understanding the tragedy, which included the spectators, journalists, and legal experts alike. At his trial, Nathan testified that he could only remember a few portions of the killing, and suspected that he could have blacked out during the time of killing. He added to this that he had suffered child abuse in his early years, not only from his father, but also from another man who remains unknown. The prosecution side questioned the validity of his claims, claiming that Nathan had a financial motive to kill his dad. A picture of a man driven by greed and desperation, said prosecutor Nigel Lickley QC. The prosecution contended that he had killed his father to avoid the repayment of debt, for access to cash and assets, which he believed rightly belonged to him. Evidence supported this theory when Nathan stole almost £8,000 of his father's cash after the murder. Despite his claim of memory loss and abuse, the jury was not fooled by the defense mounted by Nathan. They looked beyond his attempts at deflecting blame for his cold-blooded crime. The jury took several hours before delivering their verdict. Nathan Robinson was found guilty of murder. On the day of his sentencing, Nathan stood emotionless in the dock as the judge passed the sentence. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 30 years for parole eligibility. The judge condemned Nathan's actions, describing the crime as brutal, calculated murder based on greed. The case of Nathan Robinson and William Spiller turned out to be a cruel reminder for the community of Bournemouth, tale of how darkness can exist in the most commonplace lives. It was a story of a son who had betrayed his father in the most brutal manner conceivable. Motivated by the financially desperate and traumatizing bitter legacy he had experienced at the hands of his father. Was Nathan actually abused, or was that just an attempt at deflection from his actions? Would a tragedy have been stopped before it occurred if someone had intervened? The questions may never truly be answered, but this case stands out for being the cautionary tale of how anger, bitterness, and financial strain result in devastating consequences. It's a story of patricide, of betrayal, of a dark side of the human heart. Each of these three cases carries the same resonance of unresolved tensions and festering resentments wrapped up within families that result in his rule of unbelievable acts of violence. These cases expose the dark possibility of residing in strained family dynamics. What is it that drives a person to betray the ones they once loved? Could these tragedies have been avoided if someone identified the warning signs in time? Mention your thoughts in the comments section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.